Welcome to Summer Solutions with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacy Herbert. Today we're joined by Jim Rickards, author of this new book, The New Case for Gold. We're going to look at solutions to the ongoing global deflationary collapse. Nations and regions of the world have tried quantitative easing, negative interest rates, currency wars. Nothing has worked. Time to talk to the expert on these matters. Jim, welcome to the Summer Solutions.
Great to be with you, Max.
All right, Stacy, of course. What else is happening?
Yes, well, we've seen central banks try, as Max pointed out, quantitative easing, NERP. Nobody thought that was possible at the beginning of this whole crisis. Right. It's apparently possible.
Negative interest rate possible.
Yes. Yeah. Currency wars, we've seen the currency wars, but even though Japan is the most heavily engaged in currency wars, their currency continues to go up, opposite of what they want. Let's start with something very old-fashioned, because I'm starting with this because we have the Tower of London behind us. Would we still be in this crazy situation if Jamie Dimon were on a chain gang right now?
It would be a much healthier state of affairs if a number of bankers had gone to prison for the crimes that were committed. J.P. Morgan is one of the great criminal enterprises of all time. And that's not a rant, that's not an opinion. They've actually pleaded guilty to crimes. They have deferred prosecution agreements. They pay
exactly.
Criminal penalty. I'm not talking about civil.
At least 13, right?
I don't know the exact number, but one's enough to make you a criminal. And given the scale of the enterprise, that's why I call it the greatest criminal enterprise. You know, I got into a debate with a reporter once. She said, Jamie Dimon is a genius because he made, whatever, X billion dollars of profits for his stockholders. I said, look, if you give me, zero interest rates, underpriced insurance, unlimited derivatives, implied government guarantee, too big to fail, give me all those subsidies, I can make $16 billion. Actually, a trained monkey can make $16 billion. There's no talent there.
On that point, Barack Obama, when asked about the crisis of 2008, and he said that, he did nothing to stop the problems associated with that crisis. He said, oh, no, it was because of me that this whole system was saved. He saved the system. And yet, at the time of the crisis, from my gathering from your comments there, the most prudent thing to do at the time would have been to exercise the rule of law.
Correct. Bankers don't save the system, they save themselves. They did that in 1998 with the long-term capital bailout. I was at long-term capital. I negotiated that bailout. But they weren't saving us. They were saving themselves from the losses that would have arisen had we, in fact, gone out of business. We stayed in business with their money, but they took over the balance sheet. They saved themselves. Same thing is true in 1998. They saved themselves. I mean, they woke up in late 2009. They said, gee, we can't believe it. We still have our jobs, our multi-million-dollar bonuses. Nothing bad happened to us. We can start this game all over again, which they promptly did. There was no accountability at all. This is part of what's called a lack of confidence in the system. Now, Secretary Geithner at the time, Secretary of the Treasury Tim Geithner, intervened with the Justice Department. He said, do not prosecute them because confidence is fragile. If we have public prosecutions of these leading bankers, criminal prosecutions, it'll undermine confidence and maybe start the whole crisis all over again. So what business does the Secretary of the Treasury have doing, telling the Justice Department not to follow the rule of law? That's what happened.
Robo-tax Timmy? Are you talking about?
Yeah, he had his tax issues back in the day.
Yeah, but what did they do during the Great Depression? They threw bankers in jail, didn't they?
Well, there was
Cora Commission.
Well, they did something even more effective, which was they got them out of the investment banking business with Glass-Steagall.
Yes.
Now, remember what happened in the 1920s? Bankers discovered that they could originate garbage loans, package them as securities, and sell them to the customers and leave the customers with the losses.
Yeah.
In 1933-34, Congress had hearings. They said, okay, from now on, you can take deposits and make loans, or you can originate and underwrite securities, but you cannot do both. There's an inherent conflict of interest. That was the law for 65 years, all the way through 1999. Now, suddenly in 1999, the Congress decided that they were smarter than the Congress of 1934.
Under Bill Clinton.
They repealed Glass-Steagall. This is bipartisan. Phil Gramm led it for the Republicans, and Bill Clinton signed it for the Democrats. So, yes, I think it's a fair criticism of Bill Clinton, but the Republicans and Democrats were in it together.
But I'm bringing it back to Hillary Clinton because Bernie Sanders said we need to reinstate Glass-Steagall.
Absolutely.
She
Sanders
said
right
that is absurd and it's not possible.
Well, Hillary Clinton is in the pocket of the banks. I mean, what do you expect her to say? First of all, it is possible. The original Glass-Steagall legislation was 5 or 6 pages. Dodd-Frank was 2,000 pages. Glass-Steagall just said you can take deposits and make loans, or you can underwrite securities. Can't do both. It didn't say a lot more than that, but it was very effective. So yeah, it was Republicans and Democrats in it together in 1999, repealing Glass-Steagall. Well, guess what happened? Within 10 years, actually within 8 years, they originated garbage loans, put them in securities, and sold them to the customers. They did exactly what they did in the 20s, and it came as no surprise that we collapsed the system again, as we did in 1929. It was a replay.
You know, not a lot of people, going back to FDR, he gets criticized as bringing in a form of socialist-type policies. And yet, he also brought in the Securities Act of 33 and 34,
right,
which laid the groundwork for the American century on Wall Street. I mean, that's the bedrock on which Wall Street operated on for the short sale rule and all these other rules as part of that.
Right, and the first chairman of the SEC was Joe Kennedy, who was one of the great stock manipulators of all time.
Yeah.
But they said, you know, what they say, a set a fox to catch one. In other words, nobody knew more about fraud than Kennedy, so he was a good chairman, good selection.
He made a ton of money on the short side.
Absolutely. Well, he made money bootlegging, and then he expanded
in that position of an insider, he was making money on the...
Right, that was the ring run by me and Kennedy and a few others, right? They all ramped up the stocks, got out, and dumped it on the everyday citizens.
But you bring up Roosevelt. There was also Teddy Roosevelt, the distant cousin, I guess, of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Right. And he was famous for busting up the trust. And do you think that would help the U.S. economy as well, going along with throwing bankers in jail? If we have a lot of oligopolies, you might call them, 3 or 4 huge industries, whether it's telecom or pharmaceuticals or health insurance or banking. It seems like 3 or 4 control everything, airlines.
Teddy Roosevelt was our first true progressive president. We hear a lot about progressivism today because of Bernie Sanders and others, and maybe Jeremy Corbyn here in the UK. But I don't. The modern theory of antitrust laws, you don't break things up just because they're big. You break things up if it's in the best interest of consumers. So that's the new theory. But I think that's a good test, and I would apply that to banks and say we need to break up the banks. And it's going back to our Glass-Steagall discussion. Let's break them up for 3 perfectly good reasons. 1, separate commercial banking from investment banking, get rid of the conflict of interest. 2, break them up because they don't act in the best interests of the citizens and the economy. And 3, a systemic risk. In other words, this is no different than the ski patrol throwing dynamite to break up avalanches before they kill skiers. When the snow is out of control, you don't wait for it to fall down and bury the village. You actually fire cannons. You'll see ski patrol out in the morning throwing dynamite to break it up. Well, that's actually not just a metaphor. The physics and the dynamics and the mathematics of that are the same as in the banking system. When they're too big and they cascade out of control, there's no stopping it. You bury the village below. Break them up proactively before they collapse on all
right,
of us.
so we're getting into complexity theory, which is covered in this book, The New Case for Gold. So you say there's a difference between being complex and complexity.
Well, I make the distinction between complication and complexity.
And complexity,
that's
yes.
Right. So a good example is my watch. You got a nice Swiss watch here. If you take the back off this watch, it's complicated. There are gears and springs and jewels and all that, but it's not complex. It's a jeweler can remove a gear, clean it, put it back. That's fine. Complexity is when you take the back off and you find that it's soup, it's liquid soup, and you say now you have to change a gear. That's called a phase transition, when something turns into something else. When things get too big and too densely connected, they have what they call emergent properties. That's black swan is the jargon. I don't like black swan because it's not really specific. But you can put this in mathematical space. You can come up with scaling metrics. You can actually determine the magnitude and the likelihood of a financial collapse. When I say things like this, people roll their eyes and go, you're a doom and gloom guy. It's like, no, there's actually hard science behind this.
Okay, so an example of your watch, for example. So the complexity of the watch is it's as a linear expression.
Correct.
So you open it up and there's a busted gear, and you could try to replace that busted gear. And while you're doing that, you end up busting another part. Now you've got to replace 2 parts.
Right.
But you can still replace those 2 parts, put it back on, and it's tick-tocking. Whereas in complexity theory, if you make even one slight move, the entire system is obliterated.
That's
you make the example of that snowflake on the side of the mountain, which is causing the avalanche. Now, the reason we're talking about this is that the global financial system is that side of the mountain built on hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of derivatives contracts that are all supposedly perfectly matched in a Cartesian, elegant way of counterparty perfection. But as you point out, in 2008 and in other instances, when the problems occur, then on an exponential basis, you have an entire systemic collapse.
What you said is correct, Max, but when you expand what's called the scale of the system, just the size of the system, and I use the gross notional value of derivatives. So let's say you double the value of derivatives, and you go to Jamie Dimon and say, Jamie, we double the system, how much did the risk go up? He would say, well, not much at all, because we doubled it, but it's long, short, long, short, long, short, everything pairs off, comes down to a little tiny bit, they call it value at risk.
That argument is always used.
That's always used. It's nonsense, it's junk science, but that's what they say. Now, if you went to average person and said, hey, you double the system, how much did the risk go up? They would probably use intuition and say, well, you doubled it. That's the linear expression. That person's wrong, too. Jamie Dimon's wrong. The everyday person's wrong. The correct answer is it goes up exponentially. You double the system, you've increased the risk by a factor of 5 or 10 or 100, depending on the slope of the power curve. So the point is, what have we done since 2008? What do we hear about in 2008? Too big to fail, too big to fail. Since 2008, the 5 largest banks in the United States are bigger.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I started out about, these cartels.
Larger percentage of the banking assets, the derivatives books are much bigger. Everything that was too big to fail in 2008 is much bigger today, and using this exponential risk factor, the risk is beyond imagination.
So
this is why the
this
crisis
is summer
will be worse.
solutions.
Right.
The next crisis will be worse because obviously the derivatives
Much
and the debt
worse.
and the fraud is even bigger because they got away with it the first time, and Jamie Dimon's not on a chain gang out there in front of the Tower of London. So, like, how does the ordinary person protect themselves in this situation?
The policy solution is to break up the banks, ban most derivatives, and put Glass-Steagall back in place.
Ban most derivatives.
Most derivatives. They serve no social purpose. The only purpose of derivatives is to enrich bankers at the expense of customers. Because the pricing is opaque, the customers don't understand it, the banks are front-running their own customers.
Of course, all your friends on Wall Street will say, you sound like Bernie Sanders.
You know what, Stacy, it's an interesting thing. I do have a lot of friends on Wall Street. One of my associates at Long-Term Capital is the next chairman of J.P. Morgan, Matty Zanes. Matty was on the desk at Long-Term Capital. So the point is, privately they'll say you're right and keep talking about it. Publicly, they can't jeopardize their careers.
Exactly. Not that person's saying that.
Not putting words in Matt's mouth. I'm saying frequently, at dinners and one-on-one conversations on trips, they'll say you're exactly right.
We have to cut to a second half, but I know you have more solutions down there. I cut you off there.
That's okay.
So can you stay for the second half of these summer solutions? Because I know the audience loves this summer, this British summer scene back here.
Right. Love to.
All right, great. Well, stay tuned for the next part of this Jim Rickards Summer Solutions episode right here on Keiser Report. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. Hey, it's Summer Solutions. Oh, it's so fantastic. And we've got Jim Rickards with us. The new case for gold. This thing is flying off the shelves. It's fantastic. If you haven't read it already, read it now. Anyway, we're back with Summer Solutions. Jim Rickards with Stacy Herbert. Jim, welcome back.
Thanks, Max. Great to be with you.
Stacy.
At the end of the last half, we were talking about the solutions to all of this debt, all this derivatives, all this fraud, and the fact that the crash is coming. You mentioned that we need to break up the banks, ban derivatives, and then I interrupted you.
The third part would be reinstate Glass-Steagall. So break up the banks as to size, and then separate commercial banking from investment banking. That's putting Glass-Steagall back, and ban derivatives. Those three things would give us a system like the one we had from the 1930s to the 1990s, which was a stable system. Yeah, there were some bank failures, there was an S&L crisis in the 80s, but we didn't have anything like what happened in 2008, that whole time.
What is the argument? Because here are the officials from the Bank of England and the government, Hillary Clinton, official candidate in America, well, near it, to Democrat. So they say it's impossible. What are they getting wrong about impossible to reinstate Glass-Steagall?
They're failing to disclose the fact that they're in the pockets of the banks. Now, by the way, when I say things like that, Stacy, people roll their eyes and go, oh, you're ranting, whatever. No, it's all fact-based. I was invited by the United States Treasury to give a closed-door briefing by two agencies within the Treasury created by Dodd-Frank. One was the FSOC, Financial Stability Oversight Committee. The other one is the OFR, Office of Financial Research. The OFR was created by Dodd-Frank to give the Treasury like a level playing field, bring the quants in, do the kind of mathematics and analytics that we're talking about. So I was invited to give them a briefing on risk, and they were very kind to invite me, and they were very attentive. It went on for 2 hours. In the middle of it, I interrupted myself, and I turned to the senior Treasury official, and I said, you know what, I don't envy your job, because the banks own this town. And I thought he was going to jump out of his seat and yell at me and say, what are you talking about? He didn't. He looked at me and said, you're right. We can't do anything. And I said, when it comes to risk, we defer to the Fed. I said, well, that's the scariest thing I've ever heard, because I know the Fed doesn't know what they're doing. And for you, the Treasury, in charge of risk, to tell me that you defer to the Fed means that nobody here knows what they're doing.
Didn't Dick Durbin say that during the financial crisis when TARP was pushed through? Wasn't it him that said the banks own this place?
Well, if he did, he was right. And I say the same thing. But a Treasury official privately admitted that that's the case.
So let's talk about this idea of derivatives and risk. And I'll get your take on something. You know, going back to quantum physics and the beginning of the separation of mass and energy, which led to the ability of the nuclear bomb, the atomic weapons, the E equals MC squared. You know, the option pricing volatility formula separated risk from reward, and the beginning of the modern derivatives era.
Right.
So you can trade risk separately. You can extract the reward, strip out the risk, and effectively dump that into the public domain.
Well, there are a couple of problems with that. First of all, you're talking about the Black-Scholes formula, which is the options pricing formula. Every derivative, I don't care how fancy you get, how many, they're all basically options. And if you put a put and call option together, you have a future. It all comes down to that Black-Scholes formula. I shared an office with Myron Scholes for 6 years. He was very generous with his time. He would come into my office on a slow day, and I'd get a 2-hour private tutorial by the guy who wrote Black-Scholes. Yeah. Now, let me tell you, and he's a good guy, but let me tell you what's wrong with this formula. Number one, it's based on what's called the risk-free rate. The short-term Treasury rate is deemed to be risk-free. It's not risk-free. They've been downgraded by one of the credit rating agencies. I'd rather have gold than Treasury notes. So it's not risk-free. The other assumption is that the future resembles the past. In other words, that we can use past time series to extrapolate the future. So using that with a volatility, with a risk-free rate as a baseline and some fancy calculus on top of it, they can price options. But 2 of the assumptions are incorrect. Risk is not normally distributed, or 3 of the assumptions are incorrect. Risk is not normally distributed. It's distributed in accordance with the power law. The future does not resemble the past because power laws imply these extreme events. And there is no risk-free rate. So other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? So the Black-Scholes formula falls down for those reasons. Now, take it a step further. We already talked about the scaling metrics, but banks just like to price derivatives because customers don't understand them, and so it's just a way to rip off the customers. But the value at risk, normally distributed risk, the Black-Scholes formula. The other flaw, and Greenspan was guilty of this. So Greenspan said what you said, Max, which is, well, derivatives are good because you got a whole bunch of risks. So a note is a bundle of risks. So you have credit risk, operational risk, foreign currency risk, interest rate risk. They're all bundled in this note. Wouldn't it be great if we could break it up into pieces and sell those to the individual strong hands, the people best prepared to deal with that particular risk, at a lower price because they're the strong hands? And doesn't that make for a more efficient system? That was always the argument in favor of derivatives, but it ignored one thing. That would actually be a good argument if the amount of derivatives equal the amount of instruments. But you can have 20 derivatives for every $1 of instrument. And that was what was missed in the mortgage crisis. When the mortgage crisis started, there were about $1 trillion of subprime loans, subprime and all day. So everyone said, okay, normal default rates are 5% is high. Let's get crazy and assume 20% on $1 trillion. That's $200 billion of losses, which in real terms was less than the S&L crisis. So everyone was relaxed because we can absorb $200 billion of losses. What they missed was that there were $6 trillion of derivatives on top of the $1 trillion of mortgages. So you actually had a $1.2 trillion loss, and that was enough to take down the system. So the flaw in Greenspan's thinking was that if you had a 1-to-1 ratio of derivative notional value to underlying instruments, that would be a better system. But it's more like 10-to-1. And that's destabilized.
Summer Solutions, your argument is that this is all going to come down, it's going to be huge, but on the individual basis, is there something like an individual gold standard, private gold standard you talked about? Would that help them in the case that this all comes down?
Well, it's a great question, Stacy, because the technical solution we went through, which is reinstate Glass-Steagall, break up the banks, ban derivatives. So that's the solution. Odds of that happening are 0. So since the odds of that happening are 0, we are going to have a financial catastrophe. You do have to protect yourself. So the real summer solution is to buy gold. Don't go all in. I recommend 10% of your investable assets. If you put 10% of your assets in gold, when the system collapses and you can see it coming, you may suffer some losses over here, but the gold will preserve your wealth.
And of course, there are many people, I think it's something like 46% of Americans have less than $400.
Right.
So for those people, is there anything else, like perhaps strategic intelligence, your newsletter? I mean,
Well,
is there how to educate themselves?
I thank you for mentioning it. Strategic Intelligence is my monthly newsletter, and it is. I get, one of the nicest compliments I get is like, Jim, we're kind of interested in the trade recommendations, but not really. We just like the way you write, the way you explain things.
Yeah.
You're shining a light on things that nobody really wants to talk about. So I consider that the nicest compliment, and hopefully people would get something out
So
of it.
if people are educating themselves, they might not have money, but at least they know who to string up at Tower Bridge.
Right, right.
When this
I
crash
call
comes.
it people are self-medicating when it comes to finance. You know, your doctor doesn't want you to get sick, and your lawyer doesn't want you behind bars, but your broker does want to take your money. So they don't have your interests at heart, so you have to just defensively, you have to educate yourself.
You wrote, before this amazing instant classic, a couple of other books, Currency War, The Death of Money.
Right.
So kind of talking a little bit about this currency war, the Saudi Arabian threat to sell $750 billion in U.S. assets. What's this all about? What's going on there? This seems like outright currency war. That seems like a good example right there.
Well, I would say financial war, but yes, it's the same genre. But this is in response to the U.S. Threat or suggestion that actually there's a bill in Congress that's moving forward that would require.
It may have already
government.
been passed by the time this airs on Summer Solutions.
Exactly.
But,
yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah.
But this would declassify, I think, 28 pages of the 9/11 Commission report. Which, look, I don't think it's. I haven't read this, but I don't think it would come as any surprise to say that it shows that certain members of the Saudi royal family were involved in financing the 9/11 attacks, financing
but if they
Al-Qaeda.
sold these $750 billion in assets, would it actually impact?
Yeah,
Because
what would that, how would that work?
They couldn't do it. For the same reason the Chinese can't dump. All this talk about dumping treasuries is nonsense.
If they wanted to inflict pain, wouldn't it make sense to buy $750 billion in gold?
Well, here's the problem, Max. What people miss about all these threats to dump Treasury security, we control the payment system. The Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury
they could
control.
just deny your payment.
We would just freeze them. We would freeze them. We would say, okay, we're gonna make good on all these other treasuries, but your $750 billion, we'll get back to them.
Or it gets lost in Swift. Swift says, "Oh, we were hacked.
right.
You're
So the $1
$750."
trillion ATM machine, like,
You
wait
end
a
up like
minute.
Bangladesh. Bangladesh lost $100 million. Saudis will. Now, on a serious note, the U.S. is very good at freezing and seizing and not
Yes.
saying please.
Yes.
So anyone who tried to use treasuries in a malicious way would find their accounts frozen, and they would not be able to do it. So why go there?
It was also pointed out that Saudi Arabia in 2015 sold $138 billion in treasuries and assets because of their economy collapsed by 10%, their GDP fell by 10%, and yet because of quantitative easing, there were huge buyers out there, so it made no dent.
Well, just to kind of get back to the banks for a second, what the bankers said, nobody went to jail. The banks were not shut down. They all got to keep their funny baloney jobs, and they're all making $20 million a year. But what they don't understand is they're working for the government. Because when others don't want to buy treasuries, the banks will be the forced buyers of last resort. So when the Federal Reserve balance sheet is stretched and foreigners don't want to buy U.S. Treasury bonds, the banks will be forced to buy them. In the 1950s, the treasuries represented about 50% of bank assets. Banks are very conservative then. They just bought treasuries and made a small amount of loans. Today, that number is well below 10%. So there's ample room on bank balance sheets to buy treasuries. So they are the forced buyers of last resort.
China makes their banks buy them, right? Do that in
sure.
China, yeah.
The thing is that the treasuries will never go no bid because the Fed and the Treasury will simply force U.S. banks to buy them. Yeah. So there are two deterrents to dumping treasuries. One, will freeze your account. That's not too much fun. Two, even if you want to sell them out a little at a time, our banks will buy them. So you won't be able to cause a panic in the treasury market. The panic's going to come in the dollar.
Nevertheless, there is this de-dollarization around the world. And I see, for example, Russia is now going to price oil in something other than the U.S. dollar.
Yeah, they have a local pricing mechanism.
Right, and that's, remember, that was tried by Saddam Hussein, that was tried by Gaddafi, you know, and it didn't work out well for those guys.
Well, they didn't have nuclear missiles, the Russians do, so all of the Iranians are working.
But that seems that the de-dollarization trade is up and running and continuing. Your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. There's an emerging axis of gold, which consists of China, Russia, and Iran.
The axis of gold.
The axis of gold.
Oh, that's a good one.
So,
that's a new term.
That's a new book right there.
But it's, well, I talk about it in the new Keiser Gold, but it's true. China, look, there are only 35,000 tons approximately of official gold in the world. China has bought 3,000 or 4,000 tons. We don't know the exact number. It's an estimate in the last 7 years. Russia has bought 1,000 tons. Iran has bought massive amounts of gold. Don't have a good handle on the estimate, but we know they've been buying it. They said the most dangerous flight in the world is from Dubai to Tehran because the gold falls out. They're smuggling gold and it falls out of the overhead. But a lot of that gold was flowing in from Turkey. The U.S. Treasury finally had to shut down the Turkish gold trade, use a little muscle on Turkey. So the Iranians are getting the gold. Why are they getting this gold? It's because they want to be out of the dollar payment system. They want to get away from dollar hegemony, where the U.S. is ruthless and cutthroat about freezing accounts. People think they can whip the dollar around. Guess again, we'll shut you down.
Yes, all Americans know that,
Right.
and especially those living overseas.
Well, right.
Right. Well, fascinating stuff. The axis of gold. I think we'll be hearing more about that as the summer goes forward, Stacy. Well, we
Summer
got to go.
solutions. And, people could buy just even like 1/10 of an ounce of gold. They don't have to be wealthy. They don't have to buy a whole $1,300 ounce. They could buy
That's
a
right.
fraction of it.
You can buy a 1 gram bar from a reputable mint for about $50.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Get started down the gold and follow the yellow brick road. All right, well, that's good. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, Stacy.
Well, that's going to do it for this Summer Solutions episode with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Jim Rickards, author of The New Case for Gold. He also has a newsletter, Strategic Intelligence. You can find it at agorafinancial.com. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.
They promptly did. There was no accountability at all. This is part of what's called a lack of confidence in the system. Now, Secretary Geithner at the time, Secretary of the Treasury Tim Geithner, intervened with the Justice Department. He said, do not prosecute them because confidence is fragile. If we have public prosecutions of these leading bankers, criminal prosecutions, it'll undermine confidence and maybe start the whole crisis all over again. So what business does the Secretary of the Treasury have doing, telling the Justice Department not to follow the rule of law? That's what happened.
Robo-tax Timmy? Are you talking about?
Yeah, he had his tax issues back in the day.
Yeah, but what did they do during the Great Depression? They threw bankers in jail, didn't they?
Well, there was
Agora Commission.
Well, they did something even more.
Currency wars. We've seen the currency wars, but even though Japan is the most heavily engaged in currency wars, their currency continues to go up, opposite of what they want. Let's start with something very old-fashioned, because I'm starting with this because we have the Tower of London behind us. Would we still be in this crazy situation if Jamie Dimon were on a chain gang right now?
It would be a much healthier state of affairs if a number of bankers had gone to prison for the crimes that were committed. J.P. Morgan is one of the great criminal enterprises of all time. And that's not a rant, that's not an opinion. They've actually pleaded guilty to crimes. They have deferred prosecution agreements. They pay
Exactly.
criminal penalty. I'm not talking about civil.
At least 13, right?
I don't know the exact number, but
Welcome to Summer Solutions with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacy Herbert. Today we're joined by Jim Rickards, author of this new book, The New Case for Gold. We're going to look at solutions to the ongoing global deflationary collapse. Nations and regions of the world have tried quantitative easing, negative interest rates, currency wars. Nothing has worked. Time to talk to the expert on these matters. Jim, welcome to the Summer Solutions.
great to be with you, Max.
All right, Stacy, of course. What else is happening?
Yes, well, we've seen central banks try, as Max pointed out, quantitative easing, NERP. Nobody thought that was possible at the beginning of this whole crisis.
Right.
It's apparently possible.
Negative interest rate policy.
Yes.
System was saved. He saved the system. And yet, at the time of the crisis, from my gathering from your comments there, the most prudent thing to do at the time would have been to exercise the rule of law.
Correct. Bankers don't save the system; they save themselves. They did that in 1998 with the long-term capital bailout. I was at long-term capital. I negotiated that bailout, but they weren't saving us. They were saving themselves from the losses that would have arisen had we, in fact, gone out of business. We stayed in business with their money, but they took over the balance sheet. They saved themselves. Same thing is true in 1998. They saved themselves. I mean, they woke up in late 2009. They said, gee, we can't believe it. We still have our jobs, our multi-million-dollar bonuses. Nothing bad happened to us. We can start this game all over again, which one's enough to make you a criminal. And given the scale of the enterprise, that's why I call it the greatest criminal enterprise. I got into a debate with a reporter once. She said, Jamie Dimon is a genius because he made, whatever, X billion dollars of profits for his stockholders. I said, look, if you give me, zero interest rates, underpriced insurance, unlimited derivatives, implied government guarantee, too big to fail, give me all those subsidies, I can make $16 billion. Actually, a trained monkey can make $16 billion.
On that
There's
point,
no talent there.
On that point, Barack Obama, when asked about the crisis of 2008, and he was said that he did nothing to stop the problems associated with that crisis. He said, "Oh no, it was because of me that this whole for the American century on Wall Street." I mean, that's the bedrock on which Wall Street operated on the short sale rule and all these other rules as part of that.
Right, and the first chairman of the SEC was Joe Kennedy, who was one of the great stock manipulators of all time.
Yeah.
But they said, what they say, a set a fox to catch one. In other words, nobody knew more about fraud than Kennedy, so he was a good chairman, good selection.
He made a ton of money on the short side.
Absolutely. Well, he made money bootlegging, and then he expanded
in that
his
position of an insider. He was making money on the.
Right. That was the ring run by me and Kennedy and a few others. Right. They all ramped up the stocks, got out, and dumped it on the everyday citizens.
But you bring up Roosevelt. There was also Teddy Roosevelt, the distant cousin, I guess, of Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Right.
And he was famous for busting up the trust. And do you think that would help the U.S. economy as well, going along with throwing bankers in jail? If we have a lot of oligopolies, you might call them, 3 or 4 huge industries, whether it's telecom or pharmaceuticals or health insurance or banking. It seems like 3 or 4 control everything, airlines.
Teddy Roosevelt was our first true progressive president. We hear a lot about they pay
Exactly.
Criminal penalty. I'm not talking about civil.
At least 13, right?
I don't know the exact number, but one's enough to make you a criminal. And given the scale of the enterprise, that's why I call it the greatest criminal enterprise. I got into a debate with a reporter once. She said, Jamie Dimon is a genius because he made, whatever, X billion dollars of profits for his stockholders. I said, look, if you give me, 0 interest rates, underpriced insurance, unlimited derivatives, implied government guarantee, too big to fail, give me all those subsidies, I can make $16 billion. Actually, a trained monkey can make $16 billion.
On that
There's
point,
no talent there.
On that point, Barack Obama, when asked about the crisis of 2008, and he was said that he did nothing to stop the problems associated with that crisis. He said, "Oh no, it was because of me that this whole system was saved." He saved the system. And yet, at the time of the crisis, from my gathering from your comments there, the most prudent thing to do at the time would have been to exercise the rule of law.
Correct. Bankers don't save the system, they save themselves. They did that in 1998 with the long-term capital bailout. I was at long-term capital. I negotiated that bailout. But they weren't saving us. They were saving themselves from the losses that would have arisen had we, in fact, gone out of business. We stayed in business with their money, but they took over the balance sheet. They saved themselves. Same thing is true in 1990.
Welcome to Summer Solutions with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacy Herbert. Today we're joined by Jim Rickards, author of this new book, The New Case for Gold. We're going to look at solutions to the ongoing global deflationary collapse. Nations and regions of the world have tried quantitative easing, negative interest rates, currency wars. Nothing has worked. Time to talk to the expert on these matters. Jim, welcome to the Summer Solutions.
Great to be with you, Max.
All right, Stacy, of course. What else is happening?
Yes, well, we've seen central banks try, as Max pointed out, quantitative easing, NERP. Nobody thought that was possible at the beginning of this whole crisis.
Right.
It's apparently possible.
Negative interest rate policy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Currency wars, we've seen the currency wars, but even though Japan is the most heavily engaged in currency wars, their currency continues to go up, opposite of what they want. Let's start with something very old-fashioned, because I'm starting with this because we have the Tower of London behind us. Would we still be in this crazy situation if Jamie Dimon were on a chain gang right now?
It would be a much healthier state of affairs if a number of bankers had gone to prison for their crimes that were committed. J.P. Morgan is one of the great criminal enterprises of all time. And that's not a rant, that's not an opinion. They've actually pleaded guilty to crimes. They have deferred prosecution agreement in 1999. Now, suddenly in 1999, the Congress decided that they were smarter than the Congress of 1934.
Under Bill Clinton.
They repealed Glass-Steagall. This is bipartisan. Phil Gramm led it for the Republicans, and Bill Clinton signed it for the Democrats. So, yes, I think it's a fair criticism of Bill Clinton, but the Republicans and Democrats were in it together.
But I'm bringing it back to Hillary Clinton, because Bernie Sanders said we need to reinstate Glass-Steagall.
Absolutely.
She
Sanders is
said
right
that
about
is
that.
absurd and it's not possible.
Well, Hillary Clinton is in the pocket of the banks. I mean, what do you expect her to say? First of all, it is possible. The original Glass-Steagall legislation was 5 or 6 pages. Dodd-Frank was 2,000 pages. Glass-Steagall just said, you can take deposits and make loans, or you can underwrite securities, can't do both. It didn't say a lot more than that, but it was very effective. So again, it was Republicans and Democrats in it together in 1999, repealing Glass-Steagall. Well, guess what happened? Within 10 years, actually within 8 years, they originated garbage loans, put them in securities, and sold them to the customers. They did exactly what they did in the 20s, and it came as no surprise that we collapsed the system again, as we did in 1929. It was a replay.
You know, not a lot of people, going back to FDR, he gets criticized as bringing in a form of socialist-type policies. And yet, he also brought in the Securities Act of 33 and 34,
right,
which laid the groundwork.
They say themselves. I mean, they woke up in late 2009. They said, gee, we can't believe it. We still have our jobs, our multi-million-dollar bonuses. Nothing bad happened to us. We can start this game all over again, which they promptly did. There was no accountability at all. This is part of what's called a lack of confidence in the system. Now, Secretary Geithner at the time, Secretary of the Treasury Tim Geithner, intervening with the Justice Department, he said, do not prosecute them because confidence is fragile. If we have public prosecutions of these leading bankers, criminal prosecutions, it'll undermine confidence and maybe start the whole crisis all over again. So what business does the Secretary of the Treasury have doing, telling the Justice Department not to follow the rule of law? That's what happened.
Robo-tax Timmy? Are you talking about?
Yeah, he had his tax issues back in the day.
Yeah, but what did they do during the Great Depression? They threw bankers in jail, didn't they?
Well, there was
Pecora Commission.
Well, they did something even more effective, which was they got them out of the investment banking business with Glass-Steagall.
Yes.
Now, remember what happened in the 1920s. Bankers discovered that they could originate garbage loans, package them as securities, and sell them to the customers and leave the customers with the losses.
Yeah.
In 1933-34, Congress had hearings. They said, okay, from now on, you can take deposits and make loans, or you can originate and underwrite securities, but you cannot do both. There's an inherent conflict of interest. That was the law for 65 years, all the way through